All right, I'm here. Every time I try to do a live stream on this channel, something goes wrong. So let's hope that something doesn't go wrong this time. If any of you caught the last time I try, I'll like set up my phone and try and live stream from my desk right there. But it's like my internet drops out, or I accidentally press the 911 key on my phone and then it starts freaking out, and that's no fun. So what's going on here today is that Paul Tumey, cartoonist, scholar, he did this book here, Screwball. I had him on very early on in the history of this channel. He wrote to me and wanted to talk to me about the first book I did, the Hypo, and he just proposed that we do this live. And I said, okay, let's do that. But now I said, yeah, at 2 o'clock. I sent him a link, and it's 2:01. And where's Paul? I just don't know. So hello to the two people that are the one person who's watching this. How you doing? Nobody's gonna watch this, but I'll keep it up. All right, let's see. While I wait for Paul to show up, if anybody feels like coming in, I can send you the link like we usually do. Should we do that? You guys, anybody want to come in and say what's up? I have no problem. That's usually a good time. All right, go ahead. Come on in. And you can tell it's really sweaty down here, steamy down in the south. Who has the guts? Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have that much to say about, well, I don't know. Well, it depends on what kind of questions he asks, but off the top of my head, what can I really say about the Hypo? It was like the first book that I ever drew. It was a learning process. I haven't looked at it in a long time. I looked at it this morning to prepare for this, and it's just weird to look at. But yeah. All right, come on, Paul. Let's see. In the meantime, let's see if I can get one of the worst. Let's see. No, I don't want to do that. I'm afraid I'm going to get like copyright struck if I show. I was watching this interview with Stan Lee from like 2008, and it's Kevin Smith interviewing him. And it's like the worst interview I've ever seen. It's terrible. So anyway, let's write to Paul. Oh my God.
Hey, man. Sorry.
You left me hanging for 4 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. I was trying to use my work laptop and had to get around a firewall. It took me a couple of minutes.
Plus, okay.
Frantically assembling things to show you and ask you about. So, yeah. How are you?
I'm okay. You know, I feel like I've just been so busy just preparing my life. So I've been like moving stuff around.
I lost your...
You hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah. So I'm just moving around stuff and trying to get this last comic done. I'm doing a short story for the next issue of Blab that's coming out. So I've been.
Oh wow.
I'm like, this might be like the last time I get to spend real time on a comic. So I'm just like I'm trying really hard to get it done in time because I have like a month left.
Life doesn't end with fatherhood. I can attest to
I
that.
know.
It gets put on pause for a while, but you can come back to it.
I'm nervous about how it's gonna, how I'm gonna react to it, how it's gonna work for me. You know, I just don't know. Yeah. It's all like.
I understand. Yeah. Totally. And you're putting out a new issue of Blammo too, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm like almost done with that, but I just don't know, man. I haven't, you know, once I was like, I got like assigned this comic, I was like, oh, I'm going to work on this and then put everything else aside.
What comic are you talking about?
It's a comic about, yeah, the Blab comic. It's about like Frederick Wortham. And,
oh,
like,
wow.
Comic book. I think so. Like yeah. And like Crime Does Not Pay, that comic series.
Yeah, Barrow and Wood.
Yeah. So I've been working on that, and then also working on like I've just been doing like a Fonte Bukowski story for my Patreon, and I might not ever. At this point, I don't think I'm ever going to publish it. I think I'm just going to just do it for the Patreon and then
nice
let it die. So
that'll be a nice treat for your Patreon folks.
That's right. Yeah.
Is the Wortham piece going to be a, you know, the typical Van Sciver historical approach, or
oh yeah, it's all
it's like an essay.
Let me see if I can find. It's not an essay. Like it's not even. There's no like narration in it or anything. It's just basically all told in dialogue, which is the way I like to do it. I think that's the best way. Let me see if I can find it. And I feel if I have to apologize to Monty because I know he doesn't really. Like that stuff, but you know, it's just too much fun. Let's see. I want to show you one of the pages from it. This is the opening page from it.
Oh wow!
So you can see that like I'm working with like the colors. Like how do I make the colors like really faded looking? You know, make it very like old fashioned. Yeah, so I'm just like I'm muting the hell out of it. So that it looks sort of like a black and white photo that's been colorized. I don't know. That's something I'm trying to play around with.
That top photo, there's so many photos like that are, you know, have been in circulation on the internet for about 10 years or so of the newsstands from that era, and they're in black and white, and people love to colorize them, which looks kind of weird, or find the actual covers and replace them in the racks with Photoshop. But I love the look of this. You're instantly transported back in time.
Thanks.
And, man, how great it would be to go to one of those newsstands in a drugstore or a luncheonette and see that rack of comics, man, and be able to buy some of those comics for a dime each.
Yeah, I know. Doesn't everybody fantasize about that when they see those racks? They're just like,
totally.
Just go and they're like, you know, 10 cents each or whatever they were, and it's like you just scoop them all up.
Yeah, and then, you know, come back in your time machine and you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
Well, when is it? Do you know if it's going to be a boy or a girl?
It's a boy.
Boy, when is your son due to come into this world?
September 2nd. So.
Oh wow, not too far away.
Yeah, and it's already at that point where like any movement he makes, I can see. Like he's full size in there, you know. So.
Oh, that's great. That's so cool.
Like I'm like running out of time.
I have. I'm a father, and my son was born 21 years ago, just about July 14th. Reed, and so and that's the one child I have. I have a stepdaughter as well. My wife had a daughter by a previous marriage. So so I can kind of relate a little bit to the excitement and panic you guys must be going through.
It is it's all of that.
Well, it seems like a good time. It seemed to me like a good time. I just reread. That's what we're here to talk about. It's the Hypo. And I just reread this for probably the 5th or 6th time. And given that, I think this came out in 2012, so that's almost 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It certainly was 10 years ago that you were working on it. and you're on the verge of a major shift in your life. And since the Hypo came out, you have just built an amazing body of work. You have won the respect and acclaim of your peers and a huge readership. Fonte Bukowski was nominated for a couple of Eisners. I wish it would have won myself. I voted for it.
Thanks. I knew it wasn't going to win. God damn it.
Someday you will. But the Eisners is a popularity contest, basically. But in any case, it seems like a good time to look back, and pause for a moment before you jump into this next chapter and talk about this book, which I think was sort of a breakthrough for you, both professionally and artistically. And it seems to me a good place to start, if you agree, would be the story that appeared in Mom 15, which I think was your first published historical story. Is that right?
Yeah.
The True Tale of the Denver Spider-Man. Now, I know from watching your YouTube channel and reading some of your notes on in previous publications that you had been trying to break into Mom, which was published by Fantagraphics, for those who don't know it, an anthology zine, which came out, I don't know the years, in the 90s.
I think 2006 was the first issue.
Oh, some historian I am. So in the early 2000s, and it was edited by Eric Reynolds, and it remains to be a seminal publication. Many of the people who were published in here went on to become noteworthy cartoonists. Some of them were already when they were in this book, but there were a lot of new people, and you were one of them. Mm-hmm. Who are some of the others? John Pham.
Yeah, Gabriel Bell,
right?
Paul Fire, Jeffrey Brown.
There you go. Josh Simmons, I know, showed up in the later issues.
Yeah, Charles Horseman.
Right. Yeah. So just a lot of people. Eric had a great.
One more is Nick Trinasso, of course.
Oh yeah, right. Of course, Nick Trinasso. So you had Eric Reynolds had a great eye for picking and cultivating folks, and I really like when you were talking with Emil Ferris earlier. You were talking about how you wrote your own bio. Noah Van Sciver lives in Denver, never went to art school, and draws a comic book called Blammo, as well as his comic strip 4 Questions for the free weekly paper Westward. And then this last part is priceless. He is absolutely promising.
Embarrassing.
And you were at least the way you told it to Emil, which I think makes a lot of sense. You were wanting Fantagraphics and the comics community, the people who could publish you, to see you that way. So you're kind of manifesting it, making the magic happen. But you walked your talk. You lived up to the promise. You delivered a great historical story. And of course, you went on to do many more. But can you talk a little bit about how this came about? Were you submitting to Eric? What type of material were you submitting that was getting rejected? And was this historical approach new, or had you been doing some other historical stuff and he was turning it down? Give us a feel for what was going on.
The first historic comic I ever did was that one. But I was sorry, my stupid phone. I was submitting like any kind of like short story. Sorry. Basically, like if you get like that Blammo book that Kilgore just published, a lot of that stuff that's in there were the comics that I was sending to Eric Reynolds, and he would say no on them, but then he would always send like a rejection letter, and sometimes he would give me like critiques on what I was doing wrong or what I should fix.
Nice.
The kinds of things he was looking for. So it was never like no, it was always just like not yet, which was a really good way for an editor to be. So so I was just constantly sending him stories. Probably for a couple of years I was sending him comics and he was rejecting them. And he told me later on that like he just got tired of saying no to me.
You just wore him down.
Yeah. So I don't even know if he actually liked the comic that he wound up publishing in Mom. I think he just was like, all right. And and that whole thing came from Jules Pfeiffer was doing a talk. The Explainers had come out from Fantagraphics, that collection. and he was on a little tour, and he came to a bookstore in Denver and gave a talk on it. And I went to that, and then afterwards, I went up to him to get him to sign my book, and I told him, like, you know, I'm a cartoonist. I'm trying to get my work published. Do you have any like advice for me? And he said, just keep going, like don't just wear them down or something like that. I wrote this down somewhere, now I can't remember what it was. But it was something like that, like just keep doing it until because they'll get tired of saying no to you. And at that time, that was like exactly what I needed to hear, because I was obsessed with getting into Fantagraphics, and I felt like Mome was my doorway into Fantagraphics, you know. So yeah, Gabriel.
So what made you decide to try a historical piece? I was thinking maybe it was Eric Reynolds' editorial direction, but it doesn't sound like that was the case. It sounds like this is something you came up with completely on your own. Was this like a story circulating around Denver that you thought, hey, that'd make a great comic? Or do you remember?
It was one of those weird stories from Denver history that was kind of creepy. This like skinny guy killed somebody and then like lived in their attic and they didn't know. And I lived around that neighborhood. Like I knew where that house was. So I was like, oh, I could try and illustrate that as a story. I'd never done anything like that before, but that really was something that, well, after I did that, it kind of gave me the gumption to take on another short story, which is what the Hypo was supposed to be originally. Because I thought that was that works well for me. And so then when I wanted to do the Hypo, it was supposed to just be about a comic about Lincoln's duel with Shields. It was supposed to be like a short story in Blammo. But because I never thought I could do a graphic novel, because it would just take, I just felt like I didn't have the attention span for it or the work ethic for it or anything. I thought it was like a short story guy. But as I worked on it, it kind of grew into a graphic novel, you know.
Well, before we get to that, one observation that I made looking at the Denver Spider-Man story is a lot of the story is, sorry, it's reversed. A lot of the story is told through narrative. So, you know, you start out with these narrative chunks, just lots of narrative. This is the first speech balloon. Oh, it's backwards. This is the first speech balloon we get. And, you know, it's not really part of a scene. But then there's this magic moment that happens in the story. And that's where I think I suddenly, you know, like the story. Prior to that, it was like reading stories from that big book series, you know, the big book of scandals, the big book of freaks. They're all like short pieces that are just basically retellings of interesting stuff, you know, along a theme. One book would be about UFOs or something, and they're fun. And they were done by a lot of great cartoonists like Rick Geary. And I think they were a way for some cartoonists to pick up some money. But, you know, artistically, I mean, they're kind of flat. But when we get into this page right here, suddenly it's a narrative, you know, being told through dialogue, like you were talking about earlier. And it continues on to the top of this page. And actually, I'm sorry, I've got it backwards.
Yeah,
there we go. This page, which, you know, has this brutal killing in it, which is done kind of abstractly. And there's the stippling effect that you do right here, which sort of, you know, implies the blood, but also just the emotion and the violence that's going on. And I noted that in some of your other early historical pieces too, which all seem to revolve around acts of violence. Which is an interesting thing. But in any case, you went from mostly telling and not showing in a historical story about an unknown guy who, you know, lived in a crawl space and killed somebody, to an American icon, to a graphic novel about American icon. I mean, that's a huge leap. And I think in some ways it's your boldest move as a cartoonist so far in your life. And this is where I first learned about you, was when the Hypo came out. I suspect that's the case with a lot of folks. Interestingly, just as an aside, this book came out around the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you did an appearance with these authors at Fantagraphic Books. I wish I would have gone. I didn't. These guys are friends of mine, and they actually started this book in my office.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, and I got to watch them work on it for about the first 6 months, and had some, a lot of conversations and input and stuff. And while they were doing that, they did another historical novel about the Oregon Trail. They just knocked this off really quickly. It's a really, really good one.
Never seen that. That's
I highly recommend it. I might have an extra one. If I do, I'll put it in the mail to you.
That'd be great. Yeah.
David Lasky's art's great. Frank Young, his writing is fantastic. A lot of good historical detail. And so, it's like 2012 was the year of, I think James Sturm had something come out around the same time. It was this like suddenly graphic, and of course there was a precedent with Mouse. The original graphic novel in some ways, and it was this historical telling. So there's always been like this sense that comics that have a historical connection, long form comics, that's a good fit. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with all this rambling. I'm just sharing some observations. But
if the question is why I would go from the Denver Spider-Man to
how did you get that? How did you get from this level to this level so quickly? Were you like Robert Johnson? Did you go sell your soul?
Well, I wasn't thinking of it. Like, I always felt like I was working for nobody, like nobody was watching, because at the time I lived in Denver, which I know now it's considered like a really cool city and stuff, but at the time I felt like it was just nowhere. And I was spending so much time trying to break into the comics industry. And, besides like the Moan thing, I just felt like I really wasn't getting any traction. So I just felt like it didn't really matter. I could just do whatever I wanted to. And I explored any stories that were interesting to me. And after I did that story, I felt like I want to do another historic comic. And I just read a short story that was like a list of like weird presidential facts. And one of it was like, Abraham Lincoln was in a duel or whatever. So that was like, oh, that would be a good short story. Let me research that. But, it just expanded because there was so much other stuff about Abraham Lincoln in that era that was so fascinating and human,
Well, speaking of duel, there's some, I guess it says extra stuff in the back of this book, which, folks, if you haven't gotten it, it's well worth getting. Kilgore just put this out with Noah, and it collects the first 5 issues of Blammo, which are a great read. And then there's this extra stuff in the back, including the story, which looks a lot like almost like an outtake from the Hypo, the story about dueling. Can you talk about that? What is this? When did you do this?
So that plus Elijah Lovejoy, the death of Elijah Lovejoy, and like 100 other pages that just were never published were all part of the Hypo, because the Hypo was this enormous thing, because I didn't really know how to make a graphic novel. So I was just I didn't know how to tell a long form story. So I didn't know what the boundaries were. And it took me a while to figure out what the boundaries were going to be for that story. So I was just like, well, it's going to be about a duel. So let's talk about another duel that happened around that time. And so I drew that story, which was just going to be in the story. And then Elijah Lovejoy, I was like, well, I want to talk about something, another figure from that era, another abolitionist. So I drew that story. It was just going to be like this giant,
which takes place in the same year as the Hypo, 1837.
Yeah. So it was going to be
quiet,
just a giant book, but it would have been unfocused and really weird.
Yeah. These are almost like if you would have put them in the book, they would have been like sidebars or something.
Yeah,
which
there was more.
Fragmented the narrative. I think what so the book is that it's a story. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and the character goes on a journey. But if you would have interrupted it with these other stories, it would be very different. That's for sure.
And it would have been weaker too, Paul, because the thing is, I couldn't have, like, the reason I left out all of the courtroom stuff that would have been happening around the time of Lincoln, like in Lincoln's life around the time of the Hypo, and all of the politics and stuff like that, is because I didn't know anything about that. I was like 25 years old or something when I was working on that. I knew enough that, like, if I even attempt to go there, I'm going to get stuff wrong and be made fun of or whatever. So, like, let me just focus on his mental health, which was something that I had some experience with for sure in my 20s. So, Well,
I love that. And if I were to do, write a graphic novel about an icon like Lincoln, I would be really intimidated. I mean, there's so much scholarship out there on Lincoln. You could probably fill a library with books on Abraham Lincoln. And
that reminds me, by the way, Paul, around when I was working on that book, Dan Clowes' Wilson came out. And,
right.
And the back cover of Wilson had a comic where Wilson is looking through the bookstore, all the books, and he goes, God, who needs another Lincoln book? I was working on the Hypo at the time. I was like, oh, my hero. Oh,
oh no. Well, it's almost like the subject found you in a way, because you were about the same age as Lincoln is in your story, right? I figured that out. You were 28 in 2012. So, well, actually, how long can you tell us roughly when you started it and how long it took?
I started around 2009.
Okay.
And then there were, I was doing like Blammo at the same time or whatever other comics.
So roughly from the time you were 25 to the time you were 28, you were working on this book. Yeah, and you were doing, let's see, Blammo 5 came out in 2009. So this came out while you were doing the Hypo?
Yeah. And that's weird, man, because I was also working. I was working at a Panera Bread too, so it's like I would go to work in the morning and then come home and then just basically be sitting in my bedroom drawing.
Holy shit, you were productive, man.
Yeah.
And here's another one you got out during the Hypo. Each book is, more elaborate, more beautiful. The stories get better. This one has what I think of as your first great story, because I have to. Just that story is, works as a literary short story. It's really good. And 7.5, which extra stuff in there. So yeah, you put out a lot of material in addition to the Hypo while you were doing it, and you were, I guess, making a living by working a day job at.
And I had a weekly comic strip in the newspaper as well.
Right, for questions.
For 4 questions for Westward, the city paper there. So,
wow,
yeah, I don't know.
Your work ethic is impressive.
Crazy. But I had to go back and redraw so much of the Hypo, because if you start, that whole era was like so formative for me as a cartoonist that when I started the Hypo, by the time I ended it, my drawing style was totally different. So I had to go back and fix so much crap all the time.
Some examples of your early, or your style around, like when you would have started.
Yeah, the Pete Bag noodle arms is what I was doing.
Chicken strips. So but I was going somewhere with the idea that you I feel like there was some sort of, like, you put some of your own personal material. I mean, every age has interpreted Lincoln according to their times. This is what happens with icons. There's this great book I have called "Looking for Lincoln," which is exactly about this. How each era since 1865 or so has interpreted Lincoln according to their own times. And there was a period where his depression wasn't what was kind of forgotten or overlooked or glossed over. And then I think in the 70s and 80s, a group of scholars brought that back out and began to publish books on, Lincoln's depression and his depressive episodes. And so I know from reading, like, For Art's Sake and some of your autobiographical stuff, that this was a difficult and lonely time for you in your life. And your childhood was no bed of roses either in some ways, at least as it's, reading between the lines in your comics, reading in the gutters. So I think, I guess I want to ask, when you were doing this, did you ever feel like you were telling your story as well as Lincoln's? Did you feel some sort of connection to the material personally? And there's something special about this book, and I think that might be part of it, is that you were really invested.
Yeah, well, when you're telling a historic story or something that's like nonfiction, you always, the things that you're attracted to telling are things that you relate to, or things that you can kind of sympathize with.
Yeah.
So, you know, because you're definitely, when you're working on something like that, you're definitely cherry picking parts of somebody's life story that you think will fit the narrative that you're trying to tell. And if you have something that you emotionally, that like resonates with you emotionally, those will be the things that you're more likely to pick out to add into your own narrative, you know? So there were a lot of things in there. And I remember around that time I was working on it, I was with a girlfriend who I'd had for a long time. And it was like towards the end of that relationship, like, and I knew it. And so there was, I remember spending like special attention on his relationship with Mary Todd, and, you know, and the feelings that he was having in that relationship and stuff.
Yeah, that's really well done. It's really well done. Prior to reading the Hypo, I'd always thought, the little bit I knew about Mary Todd, she sounded, you know, in her later years, it sounded like she had a lot of mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And it was almost a marriage in which Lincoln kind of suffered, you know, but reading about their early days and them coming together, so the book gives us a love story, you know, basically. And I was wondering why you didn't pick Lincoln's years in New Salem prior to going to Springfield. So this book picks up when Lincoln is 28 and he's had a little bit of political success, and he moves to Springfield, which is the new capital of Illinois. And it picks up right there. As a matter of fact, we do get a little bit of narration in the beginning, and that's about it, though. Yeah. And, you know, it's like we're entering a play or something. The curtains, but that's also sort of political banners. Really, really nicely done. And you see him writing this
little donkey.
Yeah. It's great. But I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, why I chose to focus on Illinois, I think.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Because there's good stuff in his New Salem years. And that was when he had his first major depressive episode. He was in love with a woman, and she died of probably typhoid fever. There was some sort of fever raging through the community, and that sent him spiraling into depression and suicidal ideation. And he almost didn't make it out of that. So, you know, what's chronicled in the Hypo would be considered historically maybe his second known major depressive episode. So, and there were a lot of other good things in the New Salem years, you know. So did you look at that and go, oh no, this period's better, or did you just kind of organically?
It would have been too much to do that, to start to show too many mental breakdowns. And that the second one, the one that I chose on focusing on, seems more pertinent to who Lincoln becomes. You know, like you get his mental breakdown, but you also get the beginning of the relationship with the first lady, you know, and all this other stuff. And so I just felt like that was a little better. And I also got to explore a little bit of his relationship with Joshua Speed, who, you know, now people are questioning if they were gay together and stuff. And it was like, just like interesting to get into that whole thing, you know?
Yeah, really interesting page you drew for the introduction of Joshua Speed. So Joshua Speed was Lincoln's best friend, and when he comes into Springfield, he needs a place to stay, and the proprietor of, I guess it was a store, you know, said, hey, I've got a double bed. You can sleep with me if you need a place to stay. And they just kept that arrangement. And there's a great scene later in the story where they're having an argument. And Lincoln goes, I'll sleep on the floor tonight.
Yeah.
Kind of like lovers having a spat.
Yeah. I love that relationship. It's great.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting layout too that you did, you know, with these diagonal splits.
Yeah. I was more like into like exploring page layouts back then too, because when I flipped through that book this morning, I was just like, wow, look at all these different page layouts I was doing. I would never do any of this now. Now I'm just like, let me just do like an 8-panel grid or something, and that'll
yeah. Well, yeah, there are a lot of creative layouts, and you also start doing this every once in a while. We get a full page. Can you talk about that for a second? What's your philosophy about inserting the full page in between, you know, a page with smaller panels, and then we get a full page, and this is carried throughout the book. There's even one that's just all black, which signifies, you know, Lincoln's state of mind at the time. What's that about? Are you trying to break up the narrative, or
it's just That's just for pacing, you know, honestly.
Pacing.
And even the solid black pages, like even though they set a mood, it's also really good for just pacing the story out because you don't want it to go too fast. And you know, I did this a lot in the Joseph Smith book that's coming out in the spring. It's like I realized the book is just, it's hauling ass. Like the story is just going so fast. I need to slow it down as much as I possibly can. So full page illustrations are really good for slowing things down, and especially if, you know, it's like a really nice illustration that'll make somebody linger for a second, you know. So
I'm thinking about that because as a reader, I'm wondering if I just like gloss over that, like, oh, there's no action. I want more narrative, so I'm just going to flip through this really quick. Or do I pause and linger and look at it? I think I pause and linger and look at it because like you said, there are a lot of interesting details to look at and take in. And it also kind of seems to open it up for me. Instead of these small squares with talking heads, we suddenly have a vista, a landscape.
Yeah.
A lot of details, or the blackness, you know, that encourages looking in a little bit. So yeah, I think it could go either way. It depends upon how gripping the narrative is for me, or what my state of mind is. So I think that getting back to Joshua Speed, yeah, there's no overt implication that they were homosexually involved in your book, but one certainly thinks about them sleeping together all the time. It's really curious, you know, here. And Joshua is always, another interesting thing is in your book, he's always bragging about the women that he's having sex with, and he sends Lincoln to a prostitute. So we really get an interesting, you know, different side of Lincoln. You know, we see him with a prostitute. We see him in a duel.
Yeah. Well, those are the things you want to do, right? Because I feel like if I'm going to do a Lincoln book, I don't want to do like you know, like the Steven Spielberg movie version of Lincoln where he's talking about the Civil War. So, you know, I want to just like get something more indie, you know. And also, it's funny you were talking about like the curtains and stuff, how to play, and that was totally in my mind. Like this could be, maybe somebody will like adapt this for like the stage. Like, that would be a great thing. Like if this was a stage play. So like in between every chapter, there's always a page, you know, with narration about setting up where they are at this point, and it always has curtains because that's like what I was trying to kind of evoke, you know.
But most of the story is told through dialogue and action, which is not easy to do. And I think that's partly what makes the Hypo a model for how to tell historical history in comics. You're staging it, you know, you're dramatically staging it like you would in a movie. But this is, in a way, I guess this is sort of a graphic novel version of a biopic, but it feels more personal than that as well. How did you get to the place of telling a story through dialogue? Was that a very conscious decision? Like, when I'm going to do this story, which keeps growing and expanding on me, I'm going to have the discipline to just tell this through dialogue? And why? You know, why not use some narration, and why not bring in historical sources? That's what I'd be tempted to do as a historian. If I did this, there would be like 3 pages in the back of bibliography and all that crap, which this book doesn't need. And that's one reason why it's so good, because you're like right there with Lincoln. You're right there with the characters. You know, there isn't all that scholarship and extra stuff that you got to wade through. You can go get that elsewhere. You know, this is the only place I can go to get this experience of what it might have been like for Lincoln to live through these times, and other people as well. I mean, what he was going through is it's the human condition. You know, a lot of people go through that. So, sorry, there's a question in there somewhere. But how did you get to telling a story through dialogue and not narration?
I don't know, because I didn't do it consciously. A lot of those things, I wasn't putting a lot of like thought into it. I was just kind of going forward. Yeah. I had just read enough graphic novels at the time, and I subconsciously internalized what I felt like would be the best way to do something, but I wasn't thinking like, no narration. Like now I would do that. Now I'm like, all right, I don't want a narrator. I just want it, you know, to like somebody's actually there with the people, or like a movie they're watching or something. I don't want to have to explain to people what's going on. And it is, I think it's a more difficult way to work though, because it's so much easier to just be like, and then, you know, Lincoln was feeling really sad that day, and he, you know, it's better to just have to draw that and make the reader see that, you know, instead of telling them and stuff.
Yeah, well, but you show it, you know.
Yeah,
that's much harder to do.
You know, one more thing about Mome is that because I had been so obsessed about being published in Mome, when my books were published by Fantagraphics, like that book there, I insisted that it be published in the same dimensions as Mome. So that was published in the same, it fits perfectly right next to Mome, and so does St. Cole, my second book.
Got that around here somewhere. I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah.
Let's see. It looks like there's a slight height difference.
Those bastards. Like, I'm gonna...
But generally, yeah. What is it about that size that appeals to you? Do you think that's just a great size for a comic book to hold in your hands? I mean, I like the way Mome feels in my hands.
Yeah, it's a good size, but it was just a funny inside joke for myself. Like,
I get it.
Like, you know, I was so obsessed with being in this format or something. Now my books are going to be this format. And then Fonte Bukowski came out and broke that whole thing apart.
Well, change is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the dueling section, which is one of the set pieces of the book, and Lincoln has this brilliant strategy for avoiding the duel, which, you know, so it's my understanding that back in this time period, if your honor was insulted, you could get satisfaction. And this comes from reading your story, Dueling. You could get satisfaction by challenging someone to a duel, but you had to have a second. You had to have another individual, probably your best friend or somebody like that, deliver a letter. It was all very formal, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think it was President Andrew Jackson who famously killed somebody in a duel before he became president. Yeah. And Lincoln obviously was a man of peace, you know, it's one of the great ironies. He was one of the great commanders in chief, but it was all in the service of peace and trying to find harmony. But he led the country through the Civil War. And in any case, he very brilliantly, he gets to set the conditions, right, of the duel. And he says, you know, we're going to use, what are they called? Long swords, broadsword? Yeah. Broadswords. Here's a new drawing of that. And he says, we're going to put a piece of wood between you and me. And that sort of fixes them in place. So it keeps the guy with shorter arms. That's the point. It has longer arms. Keeps the guy with shorter arms from being able to reach Lincoln, whereas Lincoln could obviously have the advantage. And it still doesn't, you know, the guy has some, his challenger has some hesitation, but he's still going to get his satisfaction. So then Lincoln warms up. It's fantastic. And he's like slicing, you know, he's clearing out the shrubbery. And at that point, I think that's when the duel gets called off. Yeah. So we actually have some sort of action, Lincoln in action. Mm-hmm. I was reading in this book, Lincoln's New Salem. It came out in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And it's an account of his years in New Salem just before the events of your book. And there was a guy who challenged him to a duel. Or he didn't. It says Lincoln gravely accepted the challenge, provided his opponent. Hang on. I need to clarify that the man was much. Okay, let me just read this and see if it makes sense. Lincoln gravely accepted the challenge, provided his opponent would chalk his outline on Lincoln, and agreed not to hit outside the lines. Another clever way of keeping his honor, but avoiding, death by duel.
Yeah.
A horrible situation. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation. If you win the duel, you're a murderer.
Yeah, that's right.
If you lose the duel, you're wounded or you're dead. Mm-hmm. Really stupid convention. I'm glad we don't do that anymore. Yeah. Well, somebody disagrees.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would, how many people would be live on Twitter still? They'd just be killing each other for so many duels happening.
For the verbal duels.
Yeah.
My honor.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about was your writing and of the dialogue, right? So you're going to tell the story through the dialogue and the action that you depict, but you really capture that 19th century formal way of talking. I have here this book. I'm not a Lincoln guy. These are books that I just happen to have sitting around. I got this in the thrift store. This one I found in a little lending library about 2 weeks ago, which led me to read Hypo again. But anyway, the first piece in here is from 1832. Okay, so your book takes place in 1837, 1838. And this is a letter that was published in the paper. I'll just read the first sentence. You get a real feel for the intricacies and the elaborate language. Fellow citizens, having become a candidate for the honorable office of one of your representatives in the next General Assembly of this state, in accordance with an established custom and the principles of true republicanism, it becomes my duty to make known to you, the people whom I propose to represent, my sentiments with regard to local affairs. Phew. Your dialogue isn't that stilted, but it captures the flavor of it. How did you do that?
You have to modernize it. You have to dumb it down a little bit. I just went through this all over again with the Joseph Smith book. You just have to sort of like bastardize that style to make, because if you were to do it, like that, nobody's going to read.
You would have Al Feldstein speech balloons hanging above the head, or like Harry Tuthill, a lot of words.
So you have to really edit that. And there were a few instances I'm a little insecure about in the Joseph Smith book where I'm just like, I didn't change it enough. I'm like, this is gonna be so boring. Who's gonna read this? So you're just kind of trying to modernize it you have to do a lot of editing. But most of the language in the Hypo is legit. Like that's real stuff that was said, supposedly.
Yeah, I read somewhere that I'm not sure that's in the book, but when he met Speed, he brought his saddlebags upstairs to the room and dumped them down and said, "Okay, I moved in." Some sort of humor. There was a lot of humor in Lincoln. He said that's what kept him alive. Basically, was being able to laugh.
Yeah, so many letters, and memoirs from people that knew Lincoln around that period and stuff. You can get a lot of information from there, a lot of dialogue out of that stuff.
Yeah, here's a good example here. Forgive me, Mr. Stewart, my engagement has been broken off, and I'm a little out of sorts. So that's almost modern, but not quite. The forgive me part is very polite. There's a lot of politeness in this time period, and you capture that really well. My sincerest apologies. I can't really incur any more debt. I mean, really brief, really to the point.
Yeah.
But somehow still captures a sense of the man's elegance.
That scene was originally that was one of the first scenes I drew for that book, and I remember I submitted that to MOM. That was one of my submissions.
Oh, really? Cool.
And I remember learning later on that I had drawn the wrong doorknob, so I had to go through the whole book and change all the doorknobs that I had done. Just like the little, you twist it, modern doorknob. and they didn't have those at the time, you know. Well, I had to go back, I remember, and redraw all these little doorknobs and paste them on.
Wow. Well, this is...
Yeah, there you go. Just paste it on.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other interesting little inside details about the making of the book? What got redrawn? Like, how much did you redraw into the story?
A lot of it did. But one thing that when I was flipping through it today that irritates me to no end that I can't fix now is that I put like buttons on the shirts going down.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have that style of shirt in the 1830s where it's just buttoned down the front.
Oh, really?
It'd be like a blouse that you pull over your head and tuck in with a collar. And I look at that, I'm like, fuck, if I could just go back and just did, like, if that book were to ever come out in paperback or something, I would need some time to tinker with it and really change it. And I would get rid of the buttons. And another thing I would do is I would draw the extra finger, because when I was drawing that book, that was a really weird time for me when I was phasing out of being a cartoonist, the little four-finger cartoonist, and into trying to tell more serious stories, but I didn't change that. And so it's weird. It's really weird. And I wish I hadn't have done that. I wish I could go back and fix that. And I would if I get a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, the four fingers. I noticed that when I was rereading it. I don't think I noticed that ever before. But once I noticed it, it became really distracting, and I would look at it. And there's a few places where the thumb is on the wrong side of the hand, which is what I do all the time when I draw hand. But fortunately, the power of the narrative, takes you past all that stuff. But I did want to ask, why were you drawing four fingers? Was that like a carryover from when animators eliminated a finger to save work?
I was just like I was more of a cartoonist at that time, and I was. Telling more serious stuff was new to me. So I didn't really know how much of my style I should adjust. And the finger thing was something that was a holdover from that, I was doing chicken strips like right around that time. So
yeah, this looks a little bit like chicken strips.
Yeah.
Let me find one. Yeah, the real skinny, cartoony.
Yeah.
This may not be the best example since there's skeletons in that one. Another interesting thing is you didn't really have a photo reference of Lincoln, did you? From this era.
No.
This book, Looking for Lincoln, in the back of it, it has all the known photographs of Lincoln.
Oh, see, I would have loved to have that.
And the very first one is like almost 10 years later, from 46 or something like that, I think. And that's the first photograph of the guy, the top three that we know of. But you captured him nonetheless. I mean, he's an icon with a definite look. He had the large ears and I forget what it's called, but what they now have a word for. What's that?
Marfan, isn't it Marfan's syndrome or something like that? Like where you get like large hands.
Yeah, it begins with M. Yeah, the large hands and you're tall and you're skinny and all that stuff. Another interesting thing that I like about this book is just the title. When I first saw the book, I thought, oh, Lincoln is a drug addict. Cool. And it wasn't until I started reading that I realized the hypo was sort of an archaic term for depression.
Yeah.
And I did a little research. That goes all the way back to Hippocrates. It's the guy who coined the term. Hypomania, it was called. And today, hypomania is still a clinical term, and it's associated with bipolar, which it doesn't make sense to me that Lincoln would be bipolar. I don't see a lot of manic behavior.
Right.
But you certainly did a great job of capturing his melancholy. People who knew him knew him well, said it just like dripped from him. He was a very sad, especially burdened person.
Yeah.
But this is what's another great thing about the story, Noah, is at least one of the things I take away from it is it's a story about a person, a leader, who isn't disqualified because of his mental health problems. Today, a person, I think, who was diagnosed with mental illness probably would not be considered a qualified candidate for leadership, especially president.
Yeah. I think that's true.
But back then, it was a little different. People regarded leaders as who had melancholy and depression, that it gave them depth and wisdom. Mm-hmm. And what you're showing in this book, at least what I take away from it, is Lincoln dealing with this and finding a way to keep going, and it strengthens his character. But it's not told in a corny Lifetime movie type approach. You really feel the suffering. You really feel the stakes. When he is down, he's really down, and he's really confused about love. He's really lonely. He's having a hard time connecting in some ways, to the world and finding his place in it. And I can't help but think of you, going through that as well. And I can relate too. I had the same, still do, go through bouts of that. So, I have periods where all I can do is lie on the couch. So this is this is a great story, especially in our era. I said every era interprets icons according to their own thinking. And, we have an era, at least where some of us are more tolerant, becoming more tolerant. Mm-hmm. Of the differences of people. And I think that, for a long time in our culture, depression wasn't really accepted. It was like, get over it. Yeah. You're allowed 3 days off of work to grieve the death of a family member, and then back to work, but I think now there's a greater understanding and more sensitivity as suicide rates are climbing, and mental health is Simone Biles at the Olympics. Mm-hmm. She cited mental health reasons, and people applauded her, or at least some did. Some jerks criticized her, but in any case, it's a great story for that reason, But it's not. You're not hit over the head with it. You never draw a moral from it. You never tell us what we have to think. You just leave it there for us to find if we want to. Well, were you aware of all that? Was he like a personal hero to you when you were doing this?
I don't know. I can't remember. To be honest, I feel like that whole book just happened on accident or something. Like I was just trying to tell the story the best I could, but I didn't really have the mind.
That's probably why it's so good. If you had really overthought it, it'd probably be crap.
Yeah.
It's just flowing. It was like you were channeling or something. It's just flowing.
And I just was like excited to that it was happening, like that it was coming together, and it was readable. And I remember when I got the first copy of it, like the advanced copy of it, and I brought it to this girl that I had a crush on, and I said, look, I have a graphic novel published or whatever, and she's like, oh, I'll read it. She read it, and the next day I was at her apartment. I was like, what'd you think? And she was like, no, I didn't like it. I think. And it crushed me. And the book was just about to come out in the stores. And I remember walking home from her apartment just thinking, like, I have made a big mistake. This is going to be so embarrassing. Like, what was I thinking?
Oh, man.
So it's like totally like tainted the whole thing. And then, like you just kind of like, well, what's next? How can I prove myself still? And that's one of the things that I wish that I still had. I wonder if I still do. I don't know if I do. It's like that. It's such a valuable thing where you feel like you need to prove yourself. Mm-hmm. And at that era and that age and stuff, I just really I felt like I need to prove myself. Like I want to be a cartoonist. I need to actually prove that I can do this and that, I'm worthy of being on Fantagraphics or something, So
yeah, I went through that in my 50s. Mm-hmm. My first book, the book on Screwball comics, I put so much into that, and it was, I really want to prove that I can do this.
That was your first book?
Yeah, my first book. Short pieces published prior to that all over the place, but this was the first time I did a whole book. And it really is a collection of short pieces. So, but I wanted to ask you how the Joseph Smith book compares to the Hypo in your mind. Is it better, more advanced?
It's more advanced. I definitely put a lot more thought into it at this point. We're talking about a book that's 10 years old. And I feel like I haven't slowed down as far as my output and my work ethic since then, since I was at that age. I was working on the hypo, but I've figured things out. I'm more aware of how to tell a story, and decisions I'm making and things like that. If you would have asked me any of the questions you asked me right now while I was working on the hypo, I wouldn't have had an answer for any of them because I didn't know what I was doing. I was just going forward. And so now, I mean, I can talk about Joseph Smith and his Mormons like all day long. Like that book, I have a reason for, and that, yeah, geez, that's not a part of the book, but that was definitely a first try. Oh God.
Sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. I think it's really good. This appears in what, Blammo #7.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of, you know, I'm not lying when I say like I wanted to tell this story for a long time. I really did.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
A lot of false starts with it.
Oh man, look at that!
Crazy like that in this book.
Van Sciver version of Basil Wolverton apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. I think it's going to be really, really great. I've seen some of the previews on Instagram, but can't wait to read the whole thing and learn about it.
Hopefully it's good. And this time I have like a notes section for the back of it and stuff like that. So I actually hope that this is that nerve-wracking part where the book hasn't come out yet and like a handful of people have actually read it. So you're not really sure if it's going to be a piece of crap or not. So,
I wanted to ask you, what was the reception on the hypo when it came out? Were you, were you justified and you could look back and go, well, that girlfriend didn't know what she was talking about?
Yeah, I think that the reception was really good for it. I remember getting a lot of attention all of a sudden. In fact, I don't know if I've gotten that much attention for a book since then. Like, I was all over the place with that.
Well, I mean, part of it is the subject. It's a very accessible, popular subject.
Yeah, but I was also insecure because it's so ugly. The drawings are so ugly. And
right.
I'm taking on this subject that is so mainstream, but it's drawn like crap. And it's like you can see
and that's a point that when it was reviewed in the Comics Journal at the time by Rob Clue, I think I'm saying his name right, Clow.
Wow, yeah.
That's the first point he makes, is Noah Van Sciver draws ugly people. And of course, that's what strikes you. I remember that when I first read the hypo, I was new to your style and I opened the book and it's very unglamorous depictions of people. Mary Todd, my God, she looks kind of like an ogre or something.
I mean, I've said this before and it's true though, like drawing really did feel like driving drunk. Like it was just, I didn't know what I was doing. It's like I had this image in my mind, like I'm going to draw Mary Todd and she's going to look amazing or whatever in my mind, and then I put pen to paper and it's just, what the fuck? This is not at all how I imagined it. Why is it doing this? So I still don't have that much control of the pen, but it's, back then especially, oh my God, because I'm not a natural artist at all. Like I have to force something to represent something. Like I feel like I luck out if I'm successful at the image representing what I needed to represent.
Well, it's almost heta uma, good, bad, that Japanese style of embracing ugliness into the cartoons. But there's also a Western tradition, of grotesque. I mean, that's where caricature comes out of, the idea of exaggerating ugly features. If someone has a big nose, make it really big.
Yeah.
And, cartoonists, particularly Screwball cartoonists, took that and ran with it in the early 20th century, up to about the mid 20th century. And so your work fits into the ugliness aspect. I see, it fits into a lineage, whether consciously or not. It is really interesting, though. I mean, one recurring theme also in your recent stories about that lack of consciousness. It's almost like you've developed a meta awareness now, and you can look back on those years and go, oh, well, I was, driving the car drunk. I didn't really know what I was doing. I know that feeling. I know how that happens.
Yeah.
The onion gets more layers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you real quick about this Fantagraphics Mini that was included. I managed to score one. This is what, Lincoln's Dream before he was killed?
Right.
You probably dashed this off pretty quick and have no memory of it, I'm guessing.
No, I did. I did do it really quick because what happened was that was a new thing for Fantagraphics. Was like, if you order from us, we'll give you a free mini comic.
Yeah, a reason to order from them instead of Amazon.
Yeah. So I remember thinking like, okay, well, what can I do in the theme of the book? And there was like that famous story about Lincoln. What was it about? He sees himself in the White House dead or something. He has a dream about himself.
Yeah. I guess he wrote it in a letter or a journal or something. And and actually, that reminds me. I wanted to ask you if you've ever read this book, Lincoln's Dreams by Connie Willis.
No, never seen it before. I love that cover though. Look at that.
That's a great cover. Connie Willis is a Denver author.
Oh, okay.
When did this book come out? Oh, my copy is autographed.
Oh, look
I
at
used
that.
to be a science fiction writer, and I got to sit on a panel with Connie and got her to autograph this. This came out in '87. But this is an amazing book. It's a novel, and it's about a Civil War history researcher, historical researcher for a Civil War novelist. And he falls in love with a young woman who begins having Lincoln's dreams in the order that Lincoln dreamed them.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And he knows, being a historian, what the last dream was, which is what you depict in your mini. And he knows that could mean the demise of the woman. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible story. It really it introduced me to the joys of historical research and fiction, and how they intersect and can combine. So yeah, recommend it to you.
Cool.
Let me see if there's any other point I wanted to touch on real quick. No, I think we've
all right.
we've covered it. But the Hypo is a great book, Noah, and I'm really glad you did it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm really glad you're continuing to do historical fiction. I think you're really good at it. I think your style lends itself really well to 19th century America.
Wow. Well, I've been sitting here as you complimented me for an hour, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to gush too much. I apologize for that.
I really appreciate it, man. You really gave me a boost for the day. Good. Well,
all
right, man. Well, it was great seeing you.
You too.
And
you too.
Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, congratulations on your upcoming fatherhood and all your new projects.
I'm gonna do my best not to fuck any of it up.
Sounds like a plan. All right, take good care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.